Welcome to the City Council work session for June 28th, 2021. We'll get started with Chief of Staff Solano. Do you have a report for us?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, City Council, and Mayor Gradisar. I have two updates this evening. One is the COVID update, and the second, the American Rescue Plan Act. Under the COVID update for the week, the 1 week cumulative positive case count is 22 as of today, which is really very nice. And the 1 week positivity rate is 0.8%. So yeah, woo, is really good. We have 11 days of stabilized COVID-19 hospitalizations. The hospitalization patients at Parkview have ranged between 13 and 18 for the past week. And there are no COVID-19 patients at St. Mary Corwin as of today. The Health Department issued a press release today, however, regarding the highly transmissible Delta variant. It is now popping up in Pueblo with 9 confirmed cases. And they also included in the same news release that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccinations continue to be 83 to 88% effective against the Delta variant, which is also good news. The Pueblo Mall site is now serving as the COVID-19 Resource Center, offering both testing and vaccinations for COVID. The vaccination site is open on the inside for vaccinations of the old Sears Automotive Shop, and it is open Thursday, Friday, and Saturday from 10 until 5. And the COVID testing site is the drive-through site, open Mondays through Saturdays from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. There are also now over 20 COVID-19 site locations in Pueblo, and you can access the list here on the PowerPoint slide at the following web addresses: www.pueblohealth.org/vaccine or www.vaccine.gov. Either will take you, if you scroll down there, through a list of all the vaccine locations in Pueblo. What's very nice about the vaccine.gov, if you enter your zip code, it will pop up asking you what site location you click on. It provides you what type of vaccination is in stock. It also asks you whether you need a ride to the vaccination site. And then the next slide shows you that a new tool for all users with your cell phone is to text to number 438829, just as it is listed. You don't use the number sign in front, the brand sign. And you enter your zip code next. It will respond with enter your zip code. And then it sends you the list of the closest vaccination sites in your zip code. And it automatically replies with asking you, do you need a ride? And do you need childcare? And also gives you a telephone number to call in the event you want to speak with someone for additional questions. So those are nice tools to add to individuals looking for vaccination sites within Pueblo. As of today, eligible vaccination individuals in Pueblo County, we are up to 52%, with a goal remaining at eventually 70%. So just creeping upwards, but now over the 50% mark. Moving on to the ARPA update, with our weekly internal task force meetings, we are now on the last information sheet, we have in excess of $119 million of program requests for ARPA dollars, with 65 people volunteering to serve on one of the 7 pillars, task force pillars. Last week, all of the leaders of the pillars met together so they can decide on the next steps, and made the determination that the first task force meeting for each of those pillars will be held the week of July the 12th. So we're just a couple of weeks away from getting this rolling out to individual task force reviewing all of the program suggestions. The final ARPA Treasury regs continue to be on track to be released between July 9th or July 15th or 16th, depending on what Zoom meeting you enter into, but those are coming awfully quick in the next couple of weeks. And internally, we have been working on a scoring rubrics for all of the different program suggestions to use the ARPA dollars for. And those will be available on the SharePoint, which all of you have access to once we move it from draft form to final form. And in the meantime, I will send it to you electronically. It is here on the slide. And you can see we were looking at a process for assessing the awarding on your behalf, what we can bring to you, the scoring of all the different programs that have been suggested. So in this point distribution matrix, there will either be a 0 point, 2 points, or 4 points assessed or assigned to each of the following categories. If you go down the columns, there will be a category of assessing eligibility, which is probably key. Is the program presented eligible for ARPA funding under the Treasury guidelines? Does it not meet it? It likely meets it, or it clearly meets the Treasury guidelines. Under the column of complexity, is it a highly complex that requires more than 12 months to implement? Medium complex requiring 3 to 12 months, or light complexity that can be implemented in 3 months or less. The column of cost, if you look at the footnote below, cost is not really scored with respect to 0, 2, or 4 points. But it is critical that we associate that costing element with every proposal so that we can forecast and keep track of our program expenses. Under the column of community benefits, is the information presented going to benefit less than 25% of the community, 26 to 50% of the community, or will the majority of the community benefit from whichever program has been suggested? We have a column for equity, and this is really no impact on city equity goals and or the program goals really. Some impact or high impact. Is there evidence of sustainability? So once ARPA is gone or the program initial funding is gone, is there any evidence in this program submission that this can continue if there's less than 25%, 26 to 50, or more than 50% evidence of sustainability? And then another critical one with the Treasury guidelines is, does the program suggested meet the census tract eligibility? And the last is, how's the committee or the project submitters done their due diligence to look for any evidence of any matching funds, whether they be federal funds, state funds, other local grants? Is their program proposal contain evidence that there is matching funds in a different area outside of ARPA? So collectively, once all of the scoring rubrics by each of the members of the task force are completed, they'll forward that information, and then we will continue to put it into an Excel spreadsheet that will track totals for review internally, and then that we will bring to all of you. So that's our work to date in the last week's update on ARPA since we last met. And that also concludes the city's updates for the evening. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Solano. Any questions or comments from council? Councilor Flores?
Yes, when you put the pillars together, is there a formula as to how the total sum of the grant money will be allocated per pillar, or is that still in the works?
The exercise has not been done to allocate a determination beforehand, before review by any of these task force, a given dollar amount beforehand. So we're going to wait till that flows back up to at the mayor's level, to the internal team, and what we bring to you.
And at this stage, you've asked individuals out there in the community, including nonprofits, to submit their thought about how this money should be used. Who is gleaning all of that information and then placing it into the right column? And then at that stage, once it's the people that are in charge of that pillar, are they just going to take what we've already just received, or will they open it up to other ideas and other suggestions for the money?
Let's see if I can answer. That's probably a two-part question. And the first part is, we have an intern who is just collecting the information and allocating it to the best of the program submittal, which pillar it belongs under. But these chairs of all of the different pillars will meet collectively, because we have a sense that the applications will actually end up to look like a waffle. They're going to overlap, and they're going to make the recommendation and meet actually with the internal task force and with the mayor at the end of their 1 month process as we go into month 2 to make their recommendations on which pillar it likely will fall under best. Because then that will allow the task force individuals that have volunteered to work on the programs and the projects that will align with what their interest was. That's the answer to the first question. And the second one is, I've forgotten it now.
It was really just the ability of the pillar group to be able to look at other ideas from the community and have a different kind of application form and another kind of vetting of all the people that you've given to that column.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have a sense, and from the mayor's direction, that the submittals to date will either clearly be likely, not eligible for ARPA dollars. And many of them are going to be needed to be vetted further. They're going to need to be developed further. They're going to have to have a more serious look at their budgets. They're going to have some outreach to other individuals. So many of them are going to have that component to them.
Thank you.
Councilor Schilling.
A hard question. When are you going to come back and be able to regurgitate all this information in the plan? Is there a time date?
Yeah, I think so. The mayor is slated right now on a calendar to meet with the chairs of all of those pillars after they meet with their individual task force. And that meeting is scheduled to be in person on Wednesday, July the 28th, I believe. And after that meeting, when the internal task force then can put it all together, then we will be asking for a full work session for council.
Okay, the end of July.
End of July. That's when he meets. It will likely be a week or so after that.
Yeah, it's likely that you'll see a program come forward on its own. I mean, we're not going to wait until we know what we're going to do with every dime before we bring matters to city council.
Okay.
So, if there's a program that needs to be worked on this summer, we'll present it to you this summer so that it can be considered by you, even though the work of all the task force and the groups is not yet completed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so it's going to be a work in progress for probably a couple of years.
That was really the answer to my question. Thank you. The reality of it all.
Councilor Atencio.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Is it possible for council to get some kind of updates during the process? Because if you just bring the final product to council, we have no idea except to say yes or no on a project of some, that's doesn't give us much information except X project, yes or no. And that's, I don't think that's right.
Well, you can get, each of you got an email that allows you to access the shared drive so that you can have access to all the information and all the work that the task force are doing in that particular pillar. So that's available to you 24/7 whenever you want to get in there and look at it.
Okay.
And as we go through this, we'll bring projects to you and say, okay, this is what's been recommended by this task force or the internal group from the mayor's office. And we'd like your permission to spend this amount of money in this fashion. So, but yeah, you have access to all the work that the task force are doing 24/7.
Okay.
Councilor Wenner, are you okay?
I do have one question, actually. Laura, can you have somebody get some numbers together for us that lets us know how much weekly we're spending on sewer repair? I mean, it seems like every council meeting, I guess I shouldn't say weekly, but just every council meeting, we're approving $100,000 to $300,000 every council meeting for sewer repair.
Councilor Winter, yeah, I can reach out to the department director is Nancy Keller and ask her for either a report or an email or something to clarify.
Okay, because we might want to consider putting almost all that money toward that infrastructure, especially with all the growth we're expecting.
Thank you.
Councilor Brown.
Thank you. Are we going to get an update sometime? Maybe we've had it and I just forgot it on the, what streets we're going to overlay? Because I've had a question from one of my constituents.
Yeah, in the presentation this evening, yeah, when we talk about the half cent, there's a PowerPoint in there. It'll show you the streets that are projected for the next 5 years if this ballot measure was passed. It'll have a list of the streets. Just to give you a little preview, over the 5 years, it's about 65 streets. 35 of those are in one particular subdivision though. They're residential streets. The rest are scattered around town. But we'll go through that, yes.
Thank you.
You had a list of what was going to be done this year and next year though, from the street enterprise. I probably lost that. Could I get that again? Because people do ask me
Sure.
all the time.
Yeah.
And at least I can tell them this is what's going to be done this year, next year, whatever.
Yeah, and you'll see on the agenda tonight, there's one that's being added to the agenda. I've forgotten Portland, I think. Portland is one that.
Yeah, somebody asked me about that just yesterday.
Yep, it's being added this year. So we're obviously want to be flexible and spend as much as we can on the street repair from that existing fund. Yes, but we can get you the list for this year and next year.
Everybody else is good. I urge all of city council to get involved in that information that was sent over to us on the ARPA money and the pillars and all the requests. That's great information. And I think the one thing that we really have to guard from is this disconnect between what's going on in those groups and what city council has ideas of what's going to go on with that money. So we want to make sure that there's not a huge disconnect when these projects come forward. And I mean, I'm just worried about that. So I would suggest that everybody get involved with that. That's just my opinion. We'll move on. Thank you for the report.
Oh, I just have one more thing, Mark.
Go ahead, Lori.
Yeah, I just have one more thing, Mark, if that's okay. I just wanted to congratulate Zoe. I look forward to meeting you in person. If there's one person on the council that understands this, it would be you, but I have a high ankle injury, level 2 with ATL ligament damage. So I'm gonna be non-weight bearing for another week. And so anyway, I just want to congratulate you and let you know that I look forward to meeting you and working with you.
Ms. Solano, thank you very much for the report as always. We'll go to number 2 on the agenda, which is the Pura sale of bonds for Evraz project. We'll call to the podium Jerry Pacheco, Ralph Williams, Melissa Buck, and Tony Ackery. And I assume that Mr. Pacheco, you're the man. You turned your mic off. You need to turn it on. Hey, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming.
Good evening. I'm leading off on this lineup of extraordinary individuals, not including myself, obviously. But this presentation is going to give you a little bit of the inside of the operations and the complexity with respect to providing a local government incentive to the Evraz Corporation to construct a new long rail mill facility at their plant on the southeast corner of the city. The Pueblo Economic Development Corporation, PEDCO, obviously is the lead in all primary job recruitment in the city at the direction of the mayor and city council. Urban Renewal is asked from time to time to participate in a support role. We are never the lead. We're always the ones that you ask us to help, and we're going to help. And that was the case with the Evraz project and the Vestas project. Those are the two main primary job projects where we were specifically asked to be brought in for the express purpose of providing the community's incentive to those corporations. None of the work that we do, particularly on the economic development front and on the urban renewal front, is not possible without the cooperation of local governing bodies, the taxing entities that serve as the basis for the establishment of tax increment financing as provided by the Colorado statutes. We, on an advisory basis, send those plans to the entities and work with them to mitigate any potential negative impacts that could be experienced as a result of establishing an urban renewal project area. Vestas is a single taxpayer urban renewal project area. Melissa will discuss kind of the ins and outs of that and what that means. But given the weight of the responses that we received, this was a very good project, a very good investment opportunity, and we had really good rates. And so with that, I'd like to turn the rest of the balance of the presentation over to Tony Ackery, who's our project manager. You know Tony because he was up until recently managing your roadway projects. And Melissa Buck, who's our very valuable financial advisor with Ellers. And as always, we have Superman Ralph Williams back there if you have any questions for the good of the group. With that, Tony, Melissa.
Ready to put on the PowerPoint? Is it on? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jerry, for the very kind introduction. Just to reiterate what he said, my name is Melissa Buck. I am Pura's financial advisor, working with Ellers, and really happy to be here speaking to you all about what has been a really great project and a great reinvestment into the local community. So with that, moving into the presentation, thought we would spend a tiny bit of time going over the transaction summary. I'm not going to spend, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through every single line because it seems some of you might already be familiar with everything. We ended up doing about 88 million for the Series A, which are current interest bonds. And then we did almost just shy of 4 million in capital appreciation bonds. So the total amount that was issued as part of this project was about 91 million. Paying for this or securing these bonds is the, as Jerry mentioned, the incremental property tax revenues. So it's not an additional tax, it's simply the tax increment above the base value. And all of these bonds will be used to reimburse eligible TIF costs as well as fund capitalized interest through the construction period, which we anticipate going pretty much to 2023. And then also funding some administrative fees related to the project and project management and oversight. Going to the next slide. So some of the other things associated with this bond transaction, additional bonds. The only way Pura could issue additional bonds for this project is if it were to meet a 135% of annual debt service, and that's both a historical test, meaning last year's revenues that came in would have to provide at least 135% of that annual debt service. But then also there would have to be an outside, an independent third-party revenue projection saying that any sort of property tax revenues coming in would also meet that 135 test. So it's both a historical and a projected test. And the reason why we did that is to protect Pura from, for lack of a better way of saying it, getting out over their skis. So we priced these bonds on March 23rd, and then they closed about a week later on March 30, which is when those funds were delivered to the trustee. Both of these, both the Series A and the Series B were tax exempt at the federal level and also at the state level. So going into the next slide, as Tony mentioned, there was a lot of interest in these bonds for various different reasons, which I will go into later on this presentation. As you can see from when we first, or I should say the underwriter and I, when we worked together and we started talking about what our rate should look like and how do we get Pura the best rate possible. It's fairly common in this type of transaction to start a lot higher you offer a much higher interest rate to investors, and then you expect to trim that down as we start moving through the marketing process. So for the Series A, we were able to lower the rate by 37.5 basis points from when we first started talking to investors to when we actually closed on the bonds. And then similarly on the Series B, the capital appreciation bonds, we were able to lower that rate by 50 basis points from first initial conversations to the actual close date. So how did we end up doing that? If you can go to the next slide. As you can see, as I mentioned earlier, we ended up doing about 91 million. So size is a pretty big thing when it comes to institutional investors because they have a lot of money that they need to deploy. They need to buy bonds. So this gets people's interest. And you need a lot of interest in order to have that competitive tension and have the investors work against each other to lower your overall rate. The graph you see on the right shows what Pura's expected debt service looks like. And the reason why it spikes up a little bit in the forefront is because we anticipate a fair amount of personal property tax revenue in the forefront related to the installation of equipment. And then that has a depreciation value associated with it. So it goes down and then we end up primarily with real property tax revenues. So that's why we structured the debt that way. If you go to the next slide, this slide shows how much interest there was in this transaction. Not very often do we have something of this size and then also of this reinvestment, this great story in the community. So there was a lot of interest from investors. And if you look at the chart on the right, from my perspective, this is the who's who of investors who buy these type of bonds. So we ended up having 101 individuals look at the roadshow. And then of those, and then about 65 viewed it, 101 individuals from 65 investor accounts. And of those 65 accounts, 25 ended up placing orders when we actually priced those bonds on the 23rd. And those are the ones that are highlighted in blue there. Going to the next slide. So when we actually price the bonds, there is an allocation process depending on how many people put in an order and depending on the amount that they put in for. So about 30% were the result of direct one-on-one conversations with investors. So as part of the marketing of these bonds, there were some very targeted calls with certain accounts to make sure that they had both seen the roadshow and then answer any questions they might have. And it translated into a very positive marketing effort, which allowed us to lower Pura's overall rate. As you can see, the transaction was over 15 times oversubscribed. And what that means is we had 15 times more orders for bonds than we had available to give to bondholders. So there was a lot of interest. And then going into the next slide. So part of this too, obviously there's continuing disclosure. Everybody wants to see how this project is progressing. Everything will be publicly available too for anybody that's interested in keeping up with the project's progression. So as part of the transaction, the EVRAS has agreed to provide several items associated with the project, including the building construction schedule, including what has been completed, equipment delivery and installation, and then also, how much everything is costing and the percent complete. So the first updates are due to the authority by this August, and then after that will be filed quarterly. So as I mentioned, if anybody's interested in keeping up with this project's progression, it's all publicly available. And lastly, before I turn it over to Tony to talk a little bit more about the certification process, please keep in mind that all the bonds issued, all the money that has come to Pura for this is only for eligible TIF reimbursements. So as part of that, as part of the money that has been raised for this project, approximately 19 million has been spent to date to reimburse for these eligible TIF costs. The first reimbursement came out on May 11th for about 7.3 million, and the second one was May 26th for almost 12 million. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tony.
Thank you, Melissa. Since Melissa was kind enough to get us all this money, it's my job to make sure. But he's okay? Okay, thanks. Anyway, so it's my job to make sure that when the reimbursement submittal comes to us, those costs are validated, certified, before we issue reimbursement. So the guiding document for the reimbursement, it's called the Redevelopment and Reimbursement Agreement, or R&R Agreement. Pura entered into that with Evraz February 8th of this year. And in that, there are two key documents. Exhibit A defines the eligible expenses with the amounts, the cap. Second one is Exhibit B, and that's the actual template that all parties sign monthly, and it's the certification for all those costs. That's what goes to the trustee to issue payment. So I referenced both Exhibit A and Exhibit B. I wanted you to just have a look at those. Exhibit A, like I said, the general eligible description is provided with the cap. So as an example, there's hazardous soil disposal, and that cap is at 3.9 million. We're able to reimburse the building foundations because it's an environmental cap, up to 12.8 million. And then Exhibit B is that template that everybody signs to certify those costs. Next slide, please. Thanks. The physical process, Evraz will submit the monthly request to Urban Renewal. In that request, there's a summary sheet. The summary sheet lists eligible invoices, the vendor, the date, and the total expense. And then we'll have signatures with Evraz certifying those costs. As backup with that summary sheet, all the invoices are submitted. And then there's confirmation of payment, verifying that Evraz paid those vendors in the form of either a deposited check, an e-transfer summary with supporting documentation, such as notarized payment confirmation from that vendor, or a standard waiver and release. And just as an example, to give you a magnitude, the last submittal, the 328 pages, and it totaled the $11.7 million. So it's a pretty comprehensive document. Next slide, please. I wanted you to also be able to see the physical documents that are coming in. I mean, this is an example. I'll receive a standard AIA payment application, and then the accompanying deposited check. So, I mean, that's the kind of information I'm looking for to validate these expenses. Once all the paperwork's reviewed and confirmed, then I'll physically go out to the project and review each of those, the vendors, where they're working, what work was performed, just to kind of make sure I know that, those costs are appropriate, that I physically see the work as it has occurred. And it's just, it's a double check for all of us. And then finally, after all those pieces are completed, we're comfortable now that that monthly reimbursement, can be certified and we can reimburse Evraz. I sign the certification. Then there's a certificate and requisition form that the executive director signs. That information goes to trustees, and then they will wire transfer the money to CF&I, which is the supporting company of Evraz, as defined in that R&R agreement. So that's that. I mean, that's basic summary of it. I'd like to open it up to questions to everybody now.
Thank you very much for your report. Do we have any questions, comments? Councilor Flores.
I was the one that had asked that Pura be put on the work session for a couple of reasons. One, I really wanted the community and city council to kind of grasp how many public citizens that we have on our boards. This is one. We have so many other people serving on so many boards throughout the city, but the work that they did through the, and I happen to also be the representative from city council, but I wanted everybody to know how much work we have from our citizens that volunteer to be on boards and commissions throughout the city. And this is a classic example, even though they went through a complicated discussion about the sale of these bonds. The bottom line is that with the cooperation and working in concert with Petco, with the county, with all of the districts, and all the other people that were involved, you know, we potentially saved 1,000 jobs at the mill. And that is the potential of being selected by Evraz to build a long rail plant, and also the potential that they could have closed the whole plant down because it would have taken the majority of their income out of the city of Pueblo. So I have a question too, but I just wanted to thank, you know, Ralph Williams, who is the chair of the finance committee and was instrumental in working with the bond council and our bond company, along with everyone else on the finance committee and also the entire board and their executive director, Jerry Pacheco. But I think it shows that when we cooperate with each other and we, you know, we can do a lot of fabulous stuff in the county, in the city of Pueblo, both the city and the county. So I wanted to say that before I moved on. But the question also has to do with the bond rating that we have here in Pueblo. Tell me how that affected the sale of these bonds.
So these bonds are sold non-rated. It doesn't have any sort of direct impact on the city's rating, or the city's rating also doesn't have any direct impact on this particular transaction, because the only revenue supporting this would be that incremental property tax, or those TIF revenues. So from a credit standpoint, it's a very passive revenue stream, which is why we were very conservative with the debt service coverage ratio we applied to these bonds and how we sized the bonds with the projected revenues.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Councilor Schilling.
Dying to know the yield.
The yield on the well, the rate on the Series A was 4.75%, and then on the Series B was 5%. So the total blended rate, including cost of issuance, I think was about 4.86, which is very good.
It's a good rate to not pay taxes on.
Mm-hmm.
And Tony, you become a budget cop after a while, is what I heard you say.
Yes, sir. That's part of it.
Thank you.
Councilor Atencio.
Just a comment. Thank you for the presentation and the report on what's going on. We really hadn't heard a whole lot about what was going on, so this was really important that we get this kind of information, and it's valuable that we stay attuned to what's going on out there. But thank you for your work, and keep it up. You're doing good for us.
Councilor McCulley-Bachicha.
Hi, thank you all for sharing your knowledge. Evraz means a lot to District 4 and to the Pueblo community. So I thank you for all your efforts so it can live long. Thank you.
Councilor Winter, do you have anything?
I do, thank you. So the $88 million is for environmental cleanup. Do you know how many years that's going to take? And also I have another question. when is the long rail building going up? I think Evraz is paying for that, and then the actual urban renewal project is environmental cleanup, correct?
Yes, that's correct. The environmental cleanup, the 88 million, will probably complete probably by the end of this year. They're
Oh,
moving rapidly.
that's fast.
They had done a tremendous amount of work already. Thus we're over the 20 million in reimbursement already. And say this month will be another 8. So projecting those numbers out, they should finish most of that by the end of this year. As far as the plant, the contract was let last month.
Good.
So they're going to start, believe in August, they'll physically be bringing in materials and start the foundation. They've already excavated for it. So
Oh, good. Okay.
They're moving rapidly through it, and things are taking shape. It's going well for them.
Okay, all right. So the environmental cleanup, are they going to come in at budget with that, or under budget, or do you have any idea?
The eligible expenses, they're at a cap, and they were projected based on the physical contracts that they have. So they're based on real numbers and what the expectation is for that cleanup. So I think we're going to be probably right there at budget, because I haven't seen many change orders or additional costs. They're following those contracts, close to how they were established.
Oh, good. Oh, good. So we don't have to worry about it coming in at 150 or something.
I don't think so.
Good.
Well,
Good news. Thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead.
If I could just add to that, the other important thing to remember here is the entire project itself is about 740 million.
Mhm.
But Pura itself will only be reimbursing up to 100 million of those eligible costs.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Yes.
The yield that Councilman Schilling brought out, is that one of the reasons why it was 15 times oversubscribed, is because of that yield? And was it possible to get the interest rate lower and still be takers, or how was the interest rate arrived at?
Right. So when the presentation's on there, but when we first started sizing these bonds, when we first started conversations with investors, the rate proposed was a lot higher. And that's a common strategy.
By the investors or by us?
By the underwriter in talking to investors and looking at pricing comps and how things have priced in the market. The difficulty with this particular transaction is you really don't have a lot of single payer TIFs out there. They tend to be very risky, as you might expect, with just relying on one corporate taxpayer. Okay. So in looking at the pricing comps, it was a conversation with our underwriter, and we looked at a lot of metropolitan districts where you do typically have one taxpayer, the developer. And then we started talking to investors and seeing if there was appetite for, let's say, for example, the initial yield we looked at was 5.1% on the majority of the bonds. And there was a lot of interest at that. And so, okay, there's a lot of interest. Well, then maybe I'll go a little bit lower and see how much more interest there is. And we just kept doing that until we got to a point where you're perhaps like one investor per bond. So when it came to the pricing, there was a lot of initial interest because we went out with the initial wire. The initial pricing was 5% on the majority of those bonds. And then we ended up lowering it to 475 by the end of the day. And so it was a conjunction of marketing efforts. 475 tax exempt is pretty low, especially.
Even when you lowered it, you still had 15 times the
No,
takers?
we didn't have 15 times at that point.
Okay. All right.
I wish, then we would have gone even lower.
Okay.
But no, it was at that point, I think we had sufficient interest and enough people that wanted these bonds that we could allocate them appropriately. I would say 475 or 486 as a blended rate is extremely low primarily because everybody was really interested in the Everest project. They like the story behind it, and it's a really good higher yielding bond issue for some of these investment accounts.
Yeah.
But ultimately, for 25 years, money, 475 or 486 is quite low, especially when you compare it to historical standards.
Thank you.
Councilor Schilling.
I think you answered my term. I was wondering, answered my question, the term on the bonds.
25 years.
25. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your report. Mr. Pacheco, Mr. Williams, thank you very much for what you did on this project. I'm also part of urban renewal, and I know that this was a fantastic effort that took a lot of work, and I'm very appreciative, and I know the community is too. So.
One comment, make sure everybody understands that Everest's financial condition is an important factor.
I'm sure.
They were the single payer, and having that kind of company that works help.
Well, thank you guys again. Keep up the good work, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
We'll go on to number 3 on the agenda, which is the state of the fire department. Chief Huber, it's great to see you tonight. Thank you for coming, even though you're always here.
I am. I enjoy being here. Thank you. Mr.
Who's your
Chairman,
guest?
So my guest is the president of the IAFF Local 3, Joey Gutierrez, and we're here in solidarity to say that we discuss these plans, and so there's all transparency across the board as to what conversations take place.
Fantastic. Good to see you.
All right, members of council, Mr. Mayor, good evening, and thank you for your time. We're just going to wait for this presentation. Next slide. So over the last few years, our staffing units haven't changed. This is just a list of what we currently have. The next slide describes the topics we're going to cover for you, to talk about where our gaps in services are, what our challenges are, some of the growth that's going on. Excuse me. Total response times. We set a benchmark a couple of years ago to improve, but at the same time, we changed our dispatch system to what we call ProQA. With that, our dispatch times did go up, so we're probably going to have to adjust our benchmarks. This is a national challenge. This is not just local. So one of the things is the international, along with the IAFF, is probably going to look at getting with the NFPA standards to adjust those. Our turnout times have increased. Sorry, Daryl. But we are working on that. One of the things we discovered was that the drop lights, which is kind of how we gauge how long it takes to get to the truck, those times had gotten extended a couple of years ago, and not being aware of that, people slowed down. So we've reversed that process to improve how quickly we get on the rigs. Overall, we get to our calls in about 6.5 minutes, which is within our benchmark. Okay. The department has not really changed over the last 8 years, but since we've initiated an aggressive outreach program, we've pretty much flatlined it, and you can see that gray line where the call volume comes down. Something that's not reflected in that slow climb is the fact that some of those are DOTS calls, and you guys approved a couple of years ago increasing the personnel for a full-time community risk reduction. And since then, last year, they ran that over nearly 500 calls, which is included in that number. So it was pretty much flatlined. We look to expand that program some more because there's a lot of community collaboration that goes with that program. And with that, we get resources to people and meet them where they're at. So it's a very positive program. This map is to show you where we're not getting to very well. And if you notice in the northwest corner of the city, Pueblo Boulevard and Highway 50, we just can't get there in time. Next slide, please. These are our responses now. The areas in white that are circled are where we cannot get in 4 minutes. If we shift the current stations to the next slide, we can get to the east side territories much better. And if we add station 11, next slide, please, we can get to the whole city within 4 minutes. The white areas are where there are no developed streets. Next slide. Excuse me. So as I stated earlier, ProQA added on an average 51 to 54 seconds to our response time getting out the door. We've addressed and had company meetings last week to talk about getting our turnout times reduced a little bit more. The gaps in service is the map I just showed you. It's just too far. We need another fire station on that side of town, and the cost for that is included up there to include the building of the station, how much it would cost to add personnel. Also, towards the end of this, I'm going to continue to ask for station facility upgrades for next year. This is to improve the health and wellness of firefighters within the station. And I'd also like to build on the focus response units and the low acuity programs with community risk reduction program, because it has done significant work to stabilize our call volume in conjunction with the fact that the population continues to go up. This shows the overlap of the 4-minute response time, just pushing those 3 stations to a different location. Next slide, please. I included this so you could see the costing from the station assessment we had done in 2018. And this was just to do repairs and rebuild then. That didn't include creating a safer environment for the firefighters, to include separating out bunker gear and hot and cold zones. Here's a list of what we did for the community last year. We helped with the COVID test sites, especially when it first rolled out. We assisted with the vaccinations up through March. We implemented a new program for a 72-hour response with the health department to contact people who had an overdose. We stood by for the protests throughout the summer. We implemented a fellowship program with the United States Army to help people transitioning. We quarterly go out with several agencies to reach out to the homeless and connect them to resources. We continue to collaborate with the American Red Cross to put smoke detectors in the homes. And we have a counselor currently riding from Parkview Hospital with the DOTS team. Last year with COVID, inspections were down. Either we couldn't get into businesses or the business was closed. So this year we're going to be rolling that out again. Our fees did go down last year because a lot of businesses weren't open due to COVID. We also look to expand this program and add an inspector if possible. These are our community partners. All are very interactive. I left Triple Aim off of there. They're also very progressive. I think a lot of you sit on boards with that they're involved with, especially the surety and the opioid program. We're almost complete with our ISO inspection. We're looking to maintain a 2. For the city of Pueblo to become a 1, we would have to add some infrastructure to include a second ladder company, which includes more personnel. What we added in 2020 to be proactive, we have a vacant building outreach. We've had significant alley fires over the last year, and so we've sent units out to scan the areas and then notify the owners when their buildings were unsecured or there was significant trash that it was a safety hazard to the community. It seems to be working very well. We've implemented the local CPAP program, which allows candidates to test locally rather than having to travel and pay $135 to $150 for that test. We are training and educating a group of personnel to do the interview panel in a way that fits for the characteristics we're looking for the fire department. We're bringing in veterans as interns. Right now we have 1 in the inspection program. And we've started the initial training, which you all approved the buying of the property. Thank you very much for the 4 fire stations. Right now we have grants with multiple agencies. We have one currently with Triple Aim and we're putting in for another one through that agency. The health department, we have one currently for the 72-hour opioid response. We have 2 with AFG, one just got approved. You'll see one's on the consent agenda tonight. We're still waiting on the Homeland Security for fire investigator training. We'd like to expand how many investigators we have on each shift. And the safer we put in for 9 positions to get those personnel trained to fill station 11s. That's a 3-year grant at no cost. So we're hoping to get that. Where we bring in some money to the general fund, we have the AMR contract. AMR damages from that contract. We have 2 separate grants this year that paid for the community risk reduction crew. And the permitting process was down last year due to COVID, brought in about 50,000. Like I said earlier, our needs, we have significant capital improvement needs, mostly for the health and wellness of the firefighters, but also because apparatus continues to get larger. So they don't even really fit in the truck room anymore. And staffing challenges, especially during COVID, that second deputy chief position that we haven't funded for several years would have been critical. An inspector, there was a lot of extra duties for the inspectors this year with COVID and the 5-star program. We'd like to expand the DOTS program just because with our community partners, it's worth its cost. And then also putting in for the firefighters. If we don't get the AFG grant, we want to start building those skill levels now for when Station 11 opens. Some of the things we've done to improve the health and wellness of the firefighters. We've implemented SOPs, changing what uniforms they wear or when they wear their bunker gear, cleaning up on scene so that they're not keeping carcinogens on their skin before they go back to the station. We put ward no smokes on every first line apparatus. We created privacy space for the altered responses. We also last year put in an additional extractor on the north side to allow people to clean their bunkers quicker. And this year, probably about August, we're going to put in 2 SCBA washers. What that'll allow is a lot of times there's carcinogen, there's just the residue on the SCBAs. We put them back in the cab. We'll be able to clean those up and keep the clean cab concept. And again, expanding the FRU program allows the right unit to go to the right call, keeping the critical apparatus and service for higher reliability for the community. So our top 3 for next year is to reduce our turnout times, to continue to work with our community partners, and to continue to work on improving the fire department infrastructure. Thank you for your time. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Questions, comments? You have a question?
Just a comment, you've got a huge full plate here. And a lot of work to get done. I'm assuming when we put in 18th Street, that should cut that response time by quite a bit?
No.
No?
No, it generally needs to be a 24th or north of there. And
Okay.
5's, it's just an odd run for Station 5, which would be taking the 18th Street across.
Can't even say a little bit, huh?
Yeah, maybe the 11th Street area, but that
Okay.
lower area near the river, it might help, but that upper area in the corner, it still would be a challenge.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Winter, do you have anything?
I do. I just have kind of an off the wall question. Has there been any other discussion about the fire department having an ambulance service? It seems like that would be a great way to fund a lot of things that you need.
The ambulance service is very challenging, and a lot of your departments have found that it really doesn't turn out to be a revenue source. And in the city of Pueblo, I believe 54% of the citizens are Medicaid. So it's really not a revenue-based opportunity for the fire department. The cost of having the right number of ambulances in service and the number of personnel needed to staff that would be a challenge.
Okay. Thanks, Barb.
Thank you.
Councilor McCauley-Bachicha.
Hi. So how many FRUs do we have right now, and how many are you looking to expand to? And what stations are you putting these at? High acuity stations? Sorry, just a few questions.
No, they're good questions. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. And I don't know if everyone understands what an FRU is, so maybe explain that too.
Sure.
And how they assist the fire department.
I've been talking about them so long, I forget. So they're focused response units, and what they're a pickup truck with 2 individuals. They run basic life support calls, which are our lower acuity calls. We currently have one at Station 1s, one at Station 3s, and one that runs at night, which is probably the most popular. Joey can speak to the happiness of this membership on that, but I would like to expand it to at least maybe 2 more And then we also have the Community Risk Reduction FRU, which does the cold calling of knocking on people's doors afterwards to connect them to resources and see where their challenges are at.
Thank you for explaining that, because I think that not only do you fight fires, but a lot of medical calls. It's probably just as much or even double the fire.
So
calls.
about 85% of our calls start off as medical calls, probably 10% are fire calls. Did you want to? Yeah.
Let me introduce myself, Joey Gutierrez, Local 3 President and also Vice President for the State of Colorado Professional Firefighters. So first of all, I appreciate all you council members allowing us to speak in front of you. Thank you, Mayor. What I want to bring first and foremost is how your firefighters have served this community and how we continue to serve this community, especially during this pandemic and through it. Out of 140 firefighters, we stood fast through the entire, when most people had to shelter in their home to be safe. We were the ones that were going into those homes of sometimes whole families, one at a time, taking them to the hospital. So those scenes that you were watching on TV, your firefighters were living it. When you saw nurses and doctors not seeing their kids and through doors, I had firefighters that were sleeping in campers in their driveways for months when this first came out and about. I've had firefighters that have thought they had killed their parents because they've been exposed and their parents became exposed. So your firefighters, this council's firefighters and Pueblo's firefighters during this pandemic, before and after, will continue to provide a high level of service, sacrificing themselves and times with their family as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I've always had this in the back of my mind and I never get the answers to. I've never asked the question, but I think you answered it. So you say 20% of the fire department responds to fires.
Sorry, 100% of the fire department responds to fires other than the administration.
But the number of calls, I guess. Is
Oh,
what I'm
okay.
getting.
So out of 100 calls, probably 10 would be fire calls.
And then the rest are medical.
Medical or other.
Okay. So does every community use their fire department for medical?
The majority do.
Do they? So that's pretty much SOP throughout the country?
It is.
Okay. And if you didn't do that, who would do it?
It would have to be a private agency.
Would it?
A for-profit agency. So for us as firefighters, the service that we provide, it's a prepaid service through the sales taxes of the citizens. So when we show up, it's a free service to our citizens. We are not a for-profit, so there's no justification for us to tell somebody to go to the hospital needlessly and for them to incur a cost on them. So we are your stewards to your citizens to ensure that they're getting the care that they need. So firefighting has grown. Back in the past when firefighters were just strictly firefighters, we've adapted to be more useful to the citizens and the communities that we serve. So we do everything from when you come into this world, we'll help you deliver your baby to as you get older, all the way to heart attacks, strokes, and everything in between. Your daughter's walking to school and gets hit by a car, for God forbid, we're the ones who are going to be there. We've already shown that, that we're going to be here for all medical calls, regardless of what they are, with the homeless to the most prominent member in our community to council members. So it's multitask. We are not just firefighters. We provide a service that most would consider a highly skilled service.
Well, we appreciate that you'd even consider council people. So that's fantastic. No, but Councilor Flores?
Just briefly, I always say this because we have a report annually, but to the citizens of Pueblo, the response times and the professionalism of fire departments really affect the fire rates that people pay on their insurance, whether it's a commercial operation or whether it's just a single family dwelling. But Pueblo has one of the best fire rates, which is a protection class 2, so that the citizens, so the insurance industry actually also rates you, behind the scenes and determines that you're a first class operation. Otherwise, we wouldn't have one of the lowest fire rates in the state of Colorado. So I wanted to say that because that also is a report on the condition of our fire department. And I commend you for all the good work that you do.
Thank you.
Councilor Brown.
One other thing, it goes back to when I served, the ambulances normally only have 2 personnel. And so you have emergency theme where you have to do life support. It takes more than 2 people. So we provide the additional manpower to get them taken care of.
And that's a good point, Ed, and to piggyback on it, with the city, we're tiered response. So we generally get there before the ambulance to start those life-saving care. And then the transport agency shows up and then continues care to the hospital. So it allows for a quicker response.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Just a big thank you.
We'll go on to number 4 on the agenda, which is a loan forgiveness update. We're going to talk to Mayor Gradazar, Ms. Solano, and Mr. Kagosi. Who's up?
Mr. Chairman, Council, and Mayor Gradisar, I have a PowerPoint presentation to walk you through on the update of the COVID-19 business relief loans that began conversation earlier this year. And this is the update for the for-profit businesses. So to follow along in the PowerPoint, next slide, please. For some background, just to begin the review of this, the source of the loan funds were from Petco's 1/2 cent sales tax of $5 million that City Council approved last spring to award grants and loans to businesses incident to the COVID-19 emergency for their business. The number of business loans approved were 38 out of the full list that has been complete and sent to you probably last summer sometime. Of those 38 loans, 4 of them were to nonprofits. And earlier this year in 2021, City Council approved the forgiveness of the loan of the 4 nonprofit loans, leaving the remaining for-profit business loans of 34. In some discussion, it was determined we would look at, you would look at for consideration, what to do with the remaining 34 loans to for-profit businesses. And the rest of this few PowerPoint slides will go through the process since April that the city staff has undertaken in review to capture the data for you. Letters from the mayor were mailed to 34 businesses on April the 20th of 2021, extending an offer for consideration of loan forgiveness with the submission of the following information. The letter asked for a description of financial status, the COVID-19 impact to their business, description of the business loan use, a first quarter income statement for 2021 in comparison to 2020, the full 2020 income statement from their business and related balance sheet, as well as the full 2020 income tax return. In receiving responses for the loan forgiveness consideration letter, out of the 34 mailed, there were not responses from 9 of the 34, leaving 25 businesses responding, requesting loan forgiveness. Of the 25 that we reviewed, 7 businesses, the packet of information was not complete in its submission. The majority did not have a 2020 income statement balance and 2020 income tax return of those 7. 18 for-profit businesses submitted full packets for review. Upon the next level review, we looked at the information provided and found that 12 of the businesses generated net losses for the year of 2020 that was confirmed by review of the tax return, all paying and continuing wages. And 6 of the 18 businesses that were reviewed generated net profits rather than net losses. So 12 net losses and 6 net profits. The next level of consideration and data provided for you is we looked at the loan repayment timeline from last year's signed loan instruments and documents. And of the 34, 21 of them were signed in May of requiring loan repayment to begin in 2021 May. 11 of them were required to begin in June of 2021, 2 in July, which begins later this week, totaling all 34 of the loans to the for-profit businesses. As of last Friday, the city has received the first monthly payment from only 2 businesses, and they began in May. There have been several calls to the mayor's office requesting an extension of the start date for the repayment, as they are still businesses recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic well into 2021. And at that point, we captured all this information and sent the next slide in the mayor's direction to have a discussion with all of you in where to from here. What are potential options? Can we have some discussion, and looking for direction to staff? And that's the PowerPoint information provided. And Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, you'll recall that as Ms. Solano indicated, we brought to you the loan forgiveness for the 4 nonprofits that had acquired loans. And I think it was a sentiment among city council to consider the loan payments, forgiving the loan payments from the private parties as well. So this is the end of that process at this point in terms of what we've been able to discover. I mean, what was it, 9 just didn't respond at all. The ones that responded, most of them provided information. We felt like the loan forgiveness was justified. I think Dan, Councilor Kagosic might have some suggestions for you in terms of standards and whether you can just transform these into grants. But we just wanted to share this information with you and see what you'd like to do, how you'd like to proceed.
I'd like to hear from Mr. Kagosic before we start.
Well, the law begins with the premise that government aid to for-profit companies is limited to certain circumstances. This case went up to the Colorado Supreme Court back in the 1980s when the city of Denver gave money to United Airlines for the purpose of constructing hangars for airliner repairs at the Denver International Airport. Supreme Court said that despite the prohibition of government money going to private entities in the Colorado Constitution, it's possible for the government to provide funds to private companies if it is in the public interest. And in the United Airlines case, the Supreme Court said, yes, it is in the public interest to give them these funds because it will result in employment and taxes for the city of Denver. Fast forward to this program. One of the things that we were looking at in the tax returns of these for-profit companies is what their payroll is. And I was frankly amazed at the payroll numbers. They're very high. So is there a public benefit to giving these companies loan forgiveness? Yes, there is, because of the payroll and property tax, sales tax they provide to the city. Looking at, I looked at all 18 companies that submitted their tax returns. They all had high payroll. Some of them, most of them, as Ms. Solano said, suffered net operating losses for 2020 based on their tax returns. It would meet the test if they suffered losses in 2020 for council to turn those loans into grants because of the other public benefits the city receives. The payroll, keeping people employed, paying sales tax, paying property tax. It is a harder case to make for those companies that had a net profit in 2020, because the test is, can you repay all or some of the loan? If you had a net profit, the answer is yes. If you suffered losses in 2020, I think there's a risk that a collection effort from the city may force the company to go out of business, resulting in a loss of jobs and ultimately tax revenue. The law is very seldom black and white, and this is an area where it's gray. So, do all of them qualify? Do they all meet the public interest test? I think the 18 who suffered losses do, if you decide to go that route. Those, like Big O Tires comes to mind, that had a profit, I think the city would be hard pressed to forgive that loan. So it's really up to council to make the determination, what is in the public interest? Is it in the public interest to turn these loans into grants and not require that they get repaid? Other options are to extend the term of the loan for an additional year and require that the loan payments begin a year later than the promissory notes.
Thank you. Comments? Councilor Schilling?
Thanks, Mark. You said only, what am I looking at? Only 2 people have started making payments? How many should be making payments? 21, so that 34 should be making payments?
34 as of July the 1st.
And we have 2.
We have 2 so far.
This discussion, I mean, that says a lot to me right there. This discussion to me sets a real bad precedent that you stand up and you want to borrow the money, but you don't want to pay it back. I would be 100% against giving any consideration to the people that are making money. Like Dan said, it makes a bad precedent or sets a bad case. I'm really 100% against forgiving everything. I would be very much in favor of extending those through 21 and give them an opportunity to make up. Because all of a sudden now, gee, the city lent out money and gee, we don't have to pay it back. Only 2 of us have paid so far, and let's see what happens. And I'd be 100% against forgiving it all. I'm 100% for extending and giving them more time to pay it back. I don't want to set a precedent of we're giving away free money and we don't want to collect, we don't do anything to collect it back. I don't think that's representing the good of the citizens in any way. So I'm for holding to the debt and giving them more time to pay. Thank you.
Councilor Flores?
I was curious, maybe you can answer my question, Laura, and that is, did we ask the question of how they use the money? I know we've talked about payroll. Obviously, that's an important expense of any business, but what about a business that utilized it to buy new equipment or remodel, their business? Do we know what they use the money for?
Council Forrest, we collected that information on both sides. At the beginning, when they applied for the loan, the intent of what they would use the loan for, and in the letter from Mayor Gradisar, we asked them for a description of what they did use the loan for on the opposite end of the transaction.
My other question has to do with analyzing financial statements, which I did in my prior occupation, is very, it's sometimes difficult to analyze a financial statement and come up with the true figure. As an example, during the COVID, we had a lot of businesses that got hurt because they were labor intensive. But by the same token, they had to let people go as a result of that. So you had the ability of businesses to reduce their expenses considerably. And it's possible for a business to make more money with less employees and kind of managing the business in that way. Will we have the opportunity to look, if we wanted to, as a city council member, to look at these financial statements, or is that not possible?
Mayor says yes.
Okay.
Provided that you keep that information confidential.
I do.
Yes, in other words, tax returns by law are confidential documents. They have waived that privilege in sharing their tax returns, but they're not open for public inspection. But they are available to council.
Right. I do know that when we opened up this program, that we were a lot more flexible than a bank would be or any other kind of lending institution because it was an emergency. So I'm assuming that one of the benefits of getting a loan from the city was the simplicity of it in many ways, in that we were not analyzing a loan like a bank would, with credit worthiness, with having collateral, collateralization, and all the other things that go into making up a loan. And that to me is a benefit. That was a benefit in itself, as the ease of being able to do this. But I also think about the other 99, probably 99.9% of businesses that did not borrow any money, and they're wondering why they should have, because they potentially could benefit. But anyway, I just think I need more information. Right now, I'm in agreement with Bob that we should consider extending the due dates on these, and I'm still on the fence because I just wanted to maybe vet a couple of the files that you have to see whether or not I can glean anything from them.
Well, I think that's a good idea. You'll have to give us direction on the interest rate during this 1-year deferral. The interest rates were very favorable, 1% on the loan. And what we did was, for the first year, we took that 1% for a 5-year loan and amortized it over 4 years. So if you want to keep it at 1%, they'll, or whether you just keep the same terms and only extend the payment date, that's going to be up to you.
Councilor Atencio.
I would tend to agree with Councilor Schilling and Councilor Flores, except that the companies, the businesses that had a net loss in 2020, by virtue of having to pay this back, is they're just adding another burden to what they're going to have in 2021. So chances are they're probably going to have another net loss in 2021. And from what I hear from the businesses that I've talked to, they're not rolling in dough right now. They're just barely making it. So I'll look for more information, but I'm tending to go the forgiveness route myself.
Councilor McCauley-Bachicha.
I think that I would like to see an extension to 2021, see if we can turn any of those businesses into profit, and then analyze that then. If some of those do turn into profit, then are we going to treat those differently than the ones that continue to have losses? We should revisit that then.
Councilor Wenner, do you have anything?
I do. When council voted for this, it was not conditional with loans. We voted to help out small business, and then it came back to us with loans and grants. So I would vote yes for forgiveness of these loans because it was extraordinary circumstances, and that's what we voted yes for, was to help these small businesses. Oh, and I would also have to disagree with council looking at tax returns. I don't really think that's appropriate, Dan. I would consider that again.
Counselor Schilling.
Okay. I really don't think any of us that sitting up here want to put up with the blowback of giving out free money and you're supposed to pay us back and now you don't have to. I think that's crazy. I have no problem. Folks, we can do whatever we want as far as extension. If we give them extension through 21 and they're still struggling, we don't have to cut their heads off. We can do another extension and see if they're actually making progress. Maybe some of these companies that aren't making it shouldn't be in business. I mean, that might be a real ugly truth to the whole deal too. And we're just beating a dead horse with it. I got no problem with I don't necessarily, at the end of 21, we can look at it again, would be my suggestion. I really don't want to create the blowback. And I saw heads nodding in here. We're giving free money out and you don't have to pay us back. And I think that's nuts. But I think being fair and giving people a chance to pay it back, I'm all for that. And I'm not for cutting them off and taking the collections. Let's give them a break and give them a chance. But there may be some of them that don't belong in business. And that might be a real ugly reality for everybody. And you guys need direction, right?
I have something else to add. You know, Jared, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, Jared Polis just signed a bill to do away with personal property taxes with $50,000 in actual taxes. So to help small business. So again, it's you know, it's extraordinary circumstances, and that was what we put it out there for, was to help. I don't remember voting for this and saying it was a loan. We voted for $5 million to go out to small businesses to help them. And PEDCO does that all the time. And this is PEDCO money. Now we have Delta coming up. I know that Grand Junction is getting hit hard with Delta. So we could be looking at another lockdown. I don't know, but that's just how I feel about it.
Councilor Brown.
Well, I'm in favor of the extending it, but there ought to be some type of penalty with having to pay more interest than people that paid it off. So extending the interest through this year, another 1% or something.
So, you know, this is a catch-22 in my opinion. All the government's done over the last year and a half is screw small business. And one of the things that we did as a community very early on was to say, you know what, we're going to be very proactive in this. We're going to take $5 million out of the half-cent sales tax fund, and we're going to support our small business. Now, we supported small business through grants and loans, and we did vote on that. There was never a distinction between one might be forgiven and one might not be forgiven. I mean, the grants were never expected to be paid back, but the loans obviously were. But the reality of it is that's economic development money. And that economic development money is there to help small business. And is it crazy to say that those 34 loans should be forgiven? I mean, it was okay for nonprofits. We didn't have any problem telling the Arts Center and the other places that borrowed the money, hey, no problem, you don't have to do it. But to our bread and butter, the people who support our community through jobs and sales tax, we want to say, hey, screw you, we're not going to do it. We want the money back. I'm concerned about the distinction that you said, Mr. Kudosik, that a city government giving a company money. Most of those companies that took the loans also took grants, if I'm not mistaken. Was it one or the other, or they could do both, correct?
I think all of the ones that got loans also got grants.
Okay. So what would be the problem with turning these into grants and everybody it's just done and over with?
Well, the ordinance as it was originally adopted said that the grants could not exceed $20,000 and the loans could not exceed $100,000. So council would have to adopt an ordinance, I guess, saying that the grants can be up to $100,000. I'm not sure I remember what the highest loan is. Is it 100 or 75? 100 or, yeah. So the largest loan might be 100,000. They got a grant for 20 probably, or somewhere near that amount as well. And so that's I think the only issue.
So we had $5 million available and we spent how much?
All of it, I think. 5.1.
Spent all 100% of the 5 million.
100% of it. Yeah. I would support just wiping them out, turn them into grants.
Can we give
It's
them
growing
direction?
business.
Can we go ahead? We need to give them direction here between 7 people.
Well, I thought you had one thing on the board was Counselor Flores wanted to look at financials before he made any decision.
I would think you'd need written permission for that first. I'm just saying.
And we
Duly noted.
we need to clarify a couple of things. Counselor Winter indicated that there was no condition about borrowing the money. All of these people signed a promissory note, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. And then secondly, most of the people that got the loan got a grant, correct? Okay, so they benefited from the grant. And then associating nonprofits that really improve the quality of life. In fact, in many cities, their art center is directly funded by the city. So the nonprofits, in many cases, had no ability to do anything. They were just hamstrung, like the art center. They didn't have any basis of doing business and conducting business, but that would be, to me, a quasi-government nonprofit that really is doing what we should be doing as a city. So those 4 nonprofits that we forgave, I cannot be correlated to a profit-motivated business in my estimation. But I just wanted to clarify those 3 points before we move on.
Counselor Schilling.
Oh, sorry.
Really, I'm sorry, Lloyd, go ahead.
Oh, I would just like to clarify that that's not what I said. What I said was when we had a discussion about bringing $5 million forth, our original discussion didn't involve loans. It came back as an ordinance that stated loans and grants. But our original discussion was to help small business with this $5 million.
Counselor Schilling.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, I want to give direction and see if we've got 4 people that agree. I'd like to extend the loans and I'd like to keep the percentage at 1%. And see if there's 4 or however many people will go along with that and give them some direction.
Anybody agree with that?
Yes.
No?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, you got 4.
Okay.
You got
Just
direction.
extended till the end of the year. No payments required till the end of the year. Or do you want to make it a year from when they were due in May? Start again in May.
Sure. I mean, let's be generous, okay, but let's get the money back. I got no problem with it. I want the money back. Sorry, that makes you mad, somebody, but I think it's fair.
And during this 1-year period, the interest would not accrue. In other words, they'd still have the original 1%.
Anything else? Any other pressing matters? We will adjourn and regular meeting will begin at 7:15.